This story is written by Hans Christian Andersen. It's called The Snow Queen.
A snow queen?
Little Kay and Gerda were the best of friends. They lived next door to one another in two houses that were so close from their bedroom windows they could almost join hands. Between their bedroom windows was a tiny roof garden full of roses where Gerda and Kay would play together all summer long. In the winter, they were huddled up in Gerda's warm kitchen, listened to her grandmother's stories. One evening, she told them about the Snow Queen. On winter's night, she breathes frost on the windows. She said the children had seen frost on the windows, so they knew that the Snow Queen must be real. If the Snow Queen had her way, she'd turn everything to ice, including your heart, Grandmother warned. Just let her try, said Kay bravely, shivering at the thought. Don't worry, Grandmother reassured him. She can't conquer your heart unless you let her. That evening, when Kay went home, the first snow of winter began to fall. He sat on his bed and gazed out at the silent, swirling snowflakes. All at once, a lady appeared. She looked icy and beautiful, and she peered through the window at Kay with glittering eyes. The Snow Queen, Kay gasped. In a rush of excitement, he opened the window. The Snow Queen reached out with one long finger and stroked his cheek. An icy chill ran down little Kay's spine. Then, in a dazzling whirl of snowflakes, she vanished into thin air. Kay never told Gerda that he had seen the Snow Queen. In fact, after a while, he began to wonder whether it had been just a dream. The winter passed, and he gradually forgot all about it. Summer came, and the roses bloomed, and he and Gerda played together in their little roof garden. But Kay wasn't the boy he used to be. He didn't feel right in the summer sunshine, and he longed for winter again. The cold feeling in him grew and grew, and one day when they were watering the roses together, Kay cried out in pain. My eye! He wailed, clasping his hands over his eye. My chest! Oh, it hurts! Poor Kay, what's wrong? Asked Gerda anxiously. She looked into his eye, and at his chest, but she couldn't see anything there. In truth, when Kay had opened the window to see the Snow Queen, a tiny fragment of ice from her breath had become stuck in his eye, and another had been stuck in his heart. Gradually, their power in him had grown and grown. Now the splinter in his eye spoiled everything he saw. This is a stupid game, he said crossly, kicking over the watering can. Let's go and ask my grandmother to tell us a story, Gerda suggested. That's boring, said Kay. I don't want to play with you anymore. I'm going to play in the square with the other boys. Gerda was so upset she couldn't think of what to say. She just stood and watched Kay leave. This wasn't the boy she knew. The summer days cooled and winter came. Nothing pleased Kay the way it used to. He was restless and rude and deeply unhappy. One day he was playing with the other boys in the town square when a large white sleigh appeared. Inside was the Snow Queen. She smiled at the little boy, and her eyes glittered like ice, and Kay was utterly enchanted. He ran alongside the sleigh until it slowed down, and the Snow Queen leaned out and beckoned him. Come with me, she said. Kay climbed eagerly into the sleigh. The Snow Queen wrapped him in her long, soft cloak, and it was sinking into a snowdrift. Then she kissed his forehead, and his skin turned icy cold. She kissed him again, and he went numb all over and forgot about everything but her. The sleigh drove out of the town in a whirl of snowflakes. The boys in the square carried on with their games. It was as if they hardly noticed the sleigh at all. When Kay didn't come home, little Gerda asked the boys if she'd seen him. They shrugged their shoulders and couldn't remember. Oh dear, said Gerda. He often played with the sleigh on the frozen river. I hope he didn't fall into the water and drown. In the weeks that followed, Gerda and her mother wept for the poor lost Kay. Spring arrived with still no sign of Kay. Gerda looked out of her bedroom window at his empty one and missed him terribly. Everyone believed that Kay must have fallen through the ice on the river and drowned. But somehow, in her heart of hearts, Gerda didn't believe that he was really dead. So when the twittering swallows returned, She put on her new red shoes and walked down to the river. "If I give you the thing I love best," she said to the river, "will you give me back my Kay?" She threw her shoes in, but the river washed them back to her. "Are you telling me you don't have Kay?" Gerda asked. "Or didn't I throw my shoes far enough?" She climbed into a little boat on the shore, rowed out, and dropped her shoes in the water again. All at once the river took her boat and swept it downstream. "Are you taking me to Kay?" asked Gerda. The river didn't answer. It carried Gerda far, far downstream, through grassy meadows, along wooded banks, and further than she'd ever been before. They came to a bend in the river with a pretty garden of flowers and a front of a small thatched cottage. The boy drew into shore. Just then an old lady came out of the cottage. She was wearing a flowery sun hat and smiled sweetly at Gerda. "Come inside," she said. Inside the cottage there was a bowl of ripe cherries on the table. "Help yourself," the old lady said. "Tell me, what brings you here?" Gerda ate the sweet cherries and told the old lady about her search for little Kay. As Gerda talked, the old lady brushed her hair. The more cherries Gerda ate, the more the old lady brushed her hair, and the more distant Kay seemed to become. And in the end, Gerda forgot all about him. In fact, she forgot why she was there at all. The old lady had cast a spell on Gerda to forget everything. She didn't mean Gerda any harm. She was lonely and just wanted to keep the pretty little girl to stay and keep her company. "Come outside and see my garden," she said. She led Gerda into the garden. Every imaginable flower was there, growing there. There were sunflowers and daisies and honeysuckle and marigolds, foxgloves, freesias, lavender, and roses. While Gerda was admiring the daisies, the old lady hurried over to the roses. "Hide yourselves," she hissed. "You'll only remind the girl of her friend and make her want to leave me." She tapped the rose bush with her walking stick, and it sank beneath the ground. For many days Gerda stayed at the old lady's house, eating cherries and playing in the garden, without a thought in the world for Kay. One day, the old lady put on her flowery sun hat, and Gerda suddenly noticed a flower on it that she hadn't seen in the garden. It was a rose. She wandered out into the garden, thinking that she hadn't seen it Where have I seen this lovely flower before? It reminds me of something. Then all at once everything flooded back to her. She remembered her home, the rooftop of the roses, and her dear playmate Kay. "What am I doing here when I should be looking for Kay?" she gasped. Tears fell from her eyes and dropped onto the ground just where the rose bush lay buried. It sprang out of the soil. "I need to find Kay," Gerda blurted at it. "I don't know if he's dead, but I need to try." To her surprise, the rose bushes whispered back. "We've been underground. He is not buried there," they said. "That means he's not dead. Go and find him. Hurry, before the old lady stops you." So Gerda rushed out of the garden without saying goodbye. The summer had gone, and a cold wind blew the leaves from the trees. Gerda hurried along, wondering where to look for Kay, when she met a glossy black crow. "Craw, craw," said the crow. "Good day to you, sir," Gerda answered politely. To her surprise, the crow spoke. "Apparently you do not speak crow, so I will try to speak your language," he said. "But where are you going, so alone in the world?" So Gerda told the crow her story, from the roses on the rooftop to her search for little Kay, and how she'd spent too long in the old lady's garden and must hurry to find him. The crow cocked his head. "Humans look all the same to me, but I might have seen your friend, my sweetheart, who is a crow like me, lives in a palace. She told me that the princess there wanted a husband. All the princes she met were handsome, but empty-headed. But then a boy came from far away. He had squeaky boots, but he was clever and bright, and the princess was very pleased with him. Now he lives at the palace with her." "Oh, that could be Kay," Gerda cried out in delight. "His boots did squeak, and he is clever and bright. Please, can you show me the palace?" The crow led the way through the forest and into the fine palace surrounded by a high hill. "Craw, craw," said the crow, and another crow flew out from the palace garden to greet them. The crows talked together first in their own language and then turned to Gerda. You will not be allowed through the palace gates without shoes, said the palace crow. Only humans with shoes may go in. But I can take you to see this boy. She showed Gerda through a gap in the garden wall, and they hid among the perfumed flowers. It was evening already, and the palace windows were full of golden lights. They waited in the dark until eventually the lights went out, one by one. Then the crow said, "Follow me." They crept into the palace through the door to the kitchens. They padded up the dark stairs and out into the corridor, covered in deep rugs, which were warm and soft beneath Gerda's bare toes. The crow led Gerda through a carved wooden door into the bedroom with two beds shaped like large flowers. In one lay a sleeping princess, and in the other one lay a boy, his face hidden by his arm. Eagerly, Gerda put her hand on the boy's shoulder. "Kay, wake up, it's me, Gerda," she whispered. The boy jumped as he woke up and stared at Gerda in surprise. "Who are you?" he said. Gerda let out a little cry. The boy wasn't Kay after all. She had never seen him before in her life. "I'm sorry, I thought you were someone else," she said miserably. The princess in the next bed had woken up too, she said. "What brings you here? Perhaps we can help you." So Gerda told them everything, from the roses on the rooftop to her search for little Kay, and how the two crows had tried to help her. The princess looked at the palace crow, which was standing near her bed. "As a reward for helping this little girl, you and my other crow may eat all you like from the kitchen for the rest of your lives." "Crow!" said the crow, looking very pleased. The princess turned to Gerda. "In the morning, we will send you on your way with a carriage and horses and a coachman to drive them. That should make your search easier." The princess turned to Gerda. "In the morning, we'll send you on your way with a carriage and horses and a coachman to drive them. That should make your search easier." Gerda couldn't thank her enough. So in the morning, after filling breakfast, she was sent on her way in a golden carriage with new shoes and a warm cloak. The princess and the boy waved goodbye, and the crows flew after the carriage a little way. Then the carriage entered a thick wood, and they were lost from view. The golden carriage glinted and glimmered through the dark trees. It hadn't gone very far when a group of robbers appeared on horseback. "This carriage is ours now," the leader shouted. "Let's kill the driver." The terrified coachman fled, leaving Gerda all alone with the robbers. "What shall we do with a little girl?" asked the leader, peering in through the window. A dark-eyed robber girl looked in too. "I'll keep her as a pet," she said. She opened the door and pulled Gerda out. She took Gerda's new cloak and shoes to wear herself, and she sat the girl on the back of her horse. Together the robbers rode back to their lair, which was a ruined house in the thickest, most forgotten part of the woods. The robber girl showed Gerda the room where she slept. Then she went over to a stall in the corner of the room and led a sorry-looking reindeer out by a rope around its neck. "This is Ba," she said. "I'll keep him tied up or he'll run away." The robber girl looked darkly at Gerda and pulled out a glinting knife from her belt. "Don't you try to run away or I'll kill you," she said. Then she grinned. "Now tell me a story, and make it a good one, or I might kill you anyway." "Well," said Gerda, "I'm not sure if this is a good story, but it's certainly a true one." Then she told the robber girl her own story, from the roses on the rooftop, at home to her search for little Kay, and how the crows and the princess and the boy had tried to help her. "Coo! Coo!" said a pigeon from the rafters. "I've seen this Kay of yours. He was riding in a sleigh with a snow queen. I don't know where they were going." The reindeer spoke up in a low velvet voice. "I know where they'd go," he said. "The Snow Queen lives in a snowy Lapland where I'm from." The robber girl said, "Silence, all of you!" and they all jumped with fright. She frowned and looked at Gerda a moment. "It was a good story. All my animals seem to want to help you, so I suppose I ought to help you too," she said. She untied the reindeer. "Do you know how to get back to Lapland, Ba?" she asked. The reindeer looked at her with his dark, liquid eyes and nodded solemnly. "Then take this girl there to find her playmate," said the robber girl. "Do it quickly before I change my mind." She helped Gerda onto the reindeer's back and pushed a loaf of bread into her hand. "I hope you find him," she said gruffly. "Thank you," said Gerda, and the reindeer leaped into the night and they were away. Ba ran like the wind through the forest and out onto the plains under a starry sky, further and further north every time. Wolves howled and owls hooted, and the air hissed with cold. Strange emerald and blue lights flashed across the sky above them. "They're the northern lights," said the reindeer. "That means we're nearly there." The air grew so cold it felt as if it might crack, and soon all they could see around them was sparkling snow. They shared the loaf and carried on and on through the snow until Gerda's hands were frozen into the reindeer's coat, and her whole body was numb with cold. At last they came to a small hut. The reindeer stopped and tapped at the door with his hoof. A small bent woman let them inside. She gave the little girl some warm soup, and while she was drinking it, Ba told their story. "I know you are very clever," said the reindeer in a soft velvet voice. "You can tie all the winds together and loosen them one at a time to blow a snowdrift this way or that. Won't you help this little girl?" "You could make her as strong as 12 men," suggested the reindeer, "so that she can defeat the Snow Queen." The woman shook her head. 12 men could not defeat the Snow Queen as well as this little girl can, just as she is. Can't you see how powerful she is? Crows talk to her, reindeer carry her, even robbers help her. Her power is goodness. Nobody can defeat that. She told the reindeer to take Gerda 2 miles further north to where the Snow Queen's garden began, and to leave her there. The rest she will have to do herself. "She will die," said Ba sorrowfully. But Gerda spoke up. "I must try," she said, and she climbed onto the reindeer's back once more. The edge of the Snow Queen's garden was marked with huge jagged blocks of ice. Nothing grew in it, but the snow fell so thickly there was scarcely any air between the flakes. Gerda slid to the ground, and the reindeer wept. She put her arms around his neck. "Dear Ba," she said, "I hope we'll see each other again, but now I must hurry and save little Kay." Gerda turned and ran into the freezing cold snow.
The seagull.
Very soon she could see nothing but snowflakes. Then she realized that they were moving all by themselves and closing in on her. They swirled into shapes of fearsome creatures. Some looked like great icy bears with razor-sharp teeth, and others were like a huge frosty serpents. "Please spare me," Gerda breathed. Her breath came in white puffs into the cold air. Before her eyes, little puffs of breath drew together and became tall white figures with shields and spears. They surrounded her like guards and battled the snowflake creatures. Gerda stumbled on, half frozen to death. She reached the Snow Queen's palace and slipped inside the jagged frosty gates. The walls and the floors of the palace were polished ice. From the ceilings hung vast chandeliers, each made from hundreds of glittering icicles. Gerda ran through the chilly corridors. She came to a cavernous hall. It was filled with a giant frozen lake, shattered into countless pieces. In the middle of the lake was the Snow Queen's throne. Luckily, the throne was empty, as the Snow Queen was not home. Before she left, she had given Kay a task to keep him occupied. "Arrange these shards of ice to spell out the word eternity," she told him, "and you shall be your own master. You may have the whole world to roam in and a new pair of skates." Since then, Kay had been pushing the huge ice shards around, trying to arrange them into letters, but he could barely think, let alone work out how to do it. When Gerda came into the hall, he was sitting on a block of ice in despair. Gerda gave a cry of joy when she saw him. "I found you," she said, rushing over to him. But Kay could barely hear her. He was so frozen into the Snow Queen's power that nothing else could move him. He stared at Gerda blankly. Gerda wrapped her arms around him and burst into tears. "I've come across the world to take you home, Kay," she sobbed. "I love you more than anything." Suddenly, a tiny light appeared in the little boy's eyes, and Gerda kissed him on the cheek, and warmth seeped into his body. She kissed him again, and roses bloomed into his cheeks. All at once, Kay remembered everything. He looked at Gerda and saw his best friend standing there. "How could I have forgotten you?" he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. As a tear spilled down his face, the ice splinter that had been lodged in his eye was washed away. The warm love in his heart melted the splinter that had been stuck there too. At last, Kay was back to his old self. He put his arms around Gerda and squeezed her tightly. Gerda squeezed him even more tightly, and they both burst out laughing. Their laughter rang across the hall, making the icicles chime and the great shards of ice sing in harmony. Then something very strange began to happen. All the shards of the ice in the hall began to move. They arranged themselves slowly into shapes. "They're making letters," said Gerda. "I can't believe it," Kay whispered as the shards of ice spelled out the word that would set him free. Eternity. "Gerda, I'm free!" "Then what are we waiting for?" Gerda said, pulling to his feet. "Come quickly, let's go home." The two friends ran out of the hall, but then a voice stopped them in their tracks. "Who goes there?" Sneaking away like thieves in the night, it hissed, reaching through the corridors like fingers of ice. The children's hearts thumped with terror, and the Snow Queen appeared. She stalked down the corridor towards them, tall, cold, and furious. "Get back in the hall," she snarled, and her glare looked as if she would shatter the children where they stood. "I will not," Kay said bravely. "The ice shards spell out the word eternity. You can go and see for yourself. Your power cannot hold me here any longer." The two children slipped past the Snow Queen and ran out of the palace doors. They passed the fallen shapes of snow creatures, half crumbled where they lay, and ran on through the open, sparkling snow. Behind them, the defeated Snow Queen let out a wail like shattering ice, but there was nothing she could do to stop them. It seemed like no time at all before they had reached the tiny hut where the old lady lived, where the reindeer were waiting for Gerda. They told their story with sparkling eyes and flushed cheeks over bowls of warming soup. Then the two children climbed onto the reindeer's back and set off for home. Ba flew like the wind, and his hooves barely touching the ground. The snow gradually petered out, and the forest began. They went on and on through the trees until they reached a meadow and a winding stream. "I think we can find our way from here," said Gerda, slipping down the reindeer's back. "Ba, thank you for everything you've done for us. Now it's time for you to go back to your homeland and be happy." "I'll never forget you," Ba replied softly, and bowed his head for one last embrace. Gerda and Kay found a little boat bobbing on the banks of the river. They climbed aboard and rowed back home. Grandmother was there to welcome them and overjoyed to see them safe and sound. "Now you must have a story or two to tell me," she said. A lot of time had passed since then, but summer came again. When Gerda and Kay went up to their roof garden, they found that the roses were just coming into bloom. The end.